After close to 2 years of rotational teaching, pupils have today returned to full-time learning. This comes after Cabinet announced that the rotational system would end with immediate effect at primary, secondary and special schools. Let's look at the state of readiness, therefore, for our schools, and we're joined by education expert and University of Johannesburg Senior Research Associate, that's Professor Mary Metcalfe, who joins us via the virtual platform. Prof, thank you very much for your time. Can I start with your reaction to pupils going back to class on a full-time basis this morning? How important a step is this?
It's critically important. Our learners have really lost a huge amount of time over the last 2 years. And with that comes backlogs in what they should have learned, and backlogs in terms of the social components of schooling. So I am so happy that we've got learners back full-time. And there's a long road ahead of us in terms of, especially with younger learners, looking at numeracy and literacy, the learners that are now in grade 5, who were in grade 2, 3, who've lost time with reading, who are going to struggle to read the content material. It's a huge backlog, and we need all hands on deck to make sure that we can catch up. Well, not catch up, but that we can adjust our teaching to the learning that learners need, so that...
Yeah. Just coming to work this morning, Doctor, or Professor rather, I was listening on radio, of course, as is usual, and I had a soundbite from a parent who was saying that they are still worried about safety because some children, particularly those that are below the age of 12, they have yet to be vaccinated, and therefore overcrowding issues may just mean that they get infected with the coronavirus. What's your message to parents at this time?
As I understand it, the department has been meticulous in following the scientific advice. And the scientific advice says that there's very little risk to children that are younger than 12, that risk of serious illness with COVID increases with age. But we also know from the scientific advice that many children and many South Africans have actually had COVID without knowing it. And that's because as many as many cases are asymptomatic and a person doesn't know that they've had it. The reason that it's safe to go back to school is because, firstly, we understand more about the virus. We know that it's airborne, that we need to ventilate classrooms, and it's summer. We must keep the windows open. We must use outdoor spaces as much as possible. But we also know that levels of immunity in the population are actually quite high. I think the figure that has been given to us by the scientists is about 70%.
Yeah.
That comes from the natural infection, and it comes from vaccination. I would say that all parents who recognize that their children need to go back to school need also to commit themselves to being vaccinated, because this raises the levels of immunity within our community. It is so essential to get learners back to school.
Yeah. Prof, perhaps as a last question to you, the bigger picture here is about school dropouts. And I stand corrected here, but the figure that was bandied about just as schools were reopening this year was at around 700,000 who dropped out of school, and there wasn't certainty about whether they would return to class. The effects of that, Professor?
Good. So firstly, the question of dropout is something that pre-existed COVID, and it has to be a national priority. There's very good work being done, for example, by the Zero Dropout campaign. Secondly, dropout as a consequence of COVID is going to be a problem, but we don't know the extent of the problem yet. Dropout is something that happens as people gradually disengage from school. They lose touch with school. So this coming back to school is urgent, because it means that whether it's in high school or even some of the early grades where we've seen high levels of not returning, we need to get kids back into the routine. We need to support them. We need to help them feel that they're not being discouraged because they're now falling behind. And why this is important is because we need a society where all of our young people, as they come into adulthood and as young people, feel that they have been included, that they have a contribution to make, that they've been given the support that they need. And schooling is a very important part of that. We don't want our young people to feel betrayed. We want them to feel supported, included, and that they have a contribution to make. Dropout is a very negative start of a journey that will make the rest of participation in society hard for them.
Professor Mary Metcalfe is an education expert with the University of Johannesburg. Thank you very much for those insights.